There are airports where a crash feels like an isolated tragedy. And then there are airports where the details begin to echo. A jet comes in through cloud. A crew descends toward a runway they cannot yet see. Mountains rise nearby. The approach is demanding. The weather is closing in. The airport is real, certified, and used every day. But the margin is thin. Then, years later, or sometimes only weeks later, another aircraft approaches the same place. Different airline, different crew, different passengers, but the pattern feels strangely familiar. This is not about cursed runways. It is not about superstition. It is about geography, weather, human pressure, and procedure meeting in the same dangerous space again and again. Some airports sit in open country, where a crew has room to recover. Others sit inside valleys, beside cliffs, beside oceans, or under sudden fog. At those airports, a small mistake can become irreversible fast. The first place is Kathmandu, Nepal. Tribhuvan International Airport lies in a valley at the edge of the Himalayas. From the air, the city sits inside a bowl of hills, temples, roads, rivers, and dense neighborhoods. Beyond that bowl, the land rises hard and fast into some of the highest terrain on Earth. Flying into Kathmandu is not like lining up with a runway across flat farmland. The aircraft must enter a complicated environment where altitude, direction, cloud, and timing matter intensely. In poor visibility, the mountains may be close without looking close at all. In 1992, that reality became deadly twice. On July 31st, Thai Airways Flight 311, an Airbus A310 from Bangkok, was approaching Kathmandu. The weather was poor. The crew was dealing with workload, communication difficulties, and uncertainty about the approach. The aircraft did not remain safely positioned for the arrival. Instead of returning cleanly toward the airport from the south, it moved north into dangerous terrain. The jet struck a mountain in the Langtang region, north of Kathmandu. All 113 people on board died. For investigators and rescuers, even reaching the wreckage was difficult. This was not a crash beside a runway where emergency vehicles could arrive in minutes. It was a crash in steep, remote Himalayan terrain, where the landscape itself slowed the response. Then, only 59 days later, another large passenger jet was approaching the same airport. Pakistan International Airlines Flight 268, an Airbus A300 from Karachi, was descending toward Kathmandu on September 28, 1992. This was a different aircraft, a different airline, different crew, and a different flight path, but the danger was again connected to descent, terrain, and the unforgiving geometry of the valley. The aircraft came down below the proper profile during the approach. It struck a hillside at Batedanda, south of Kathmandu. All 167 people on board died. Two major jets, same destination, same year, less than 2 months apart, both lost before reaching the runway. What makes the Kathmandu cases so disturbing is not that the accidents were identical. They were not. The details differed, but both revealed the same brutal truth. Around a mountain airport, being close to the airport does not mean being safe. A flatland approach gives pilots options. A valley approach gives them boundaries. Mountains do not move. Cloud can hide them. Radio instructions can be misunderstood. Approach charts can be misread. A descent that seems almost correct can still be fatally wrong. This is the danger known as controlled flight into terrain. An aircraft under control, with no mechanical failure necessarily causing the loss, flies into the ground, water, or an obstacle because the crew does not fully perceive the danger in time. It is one of aviation's most haunting accident types because the airplane may be working, the engines may be producing power,
The crew may believe they are still managing the flight. The passengers may have no warning at all.
At airports like Kathmandu, the trap is built from layers. The runway is real. The approach is published. Aircraft land there successfully. But the environment does not forgive confusion. If a crew loses situational awareness, if the aircraft is too low, if the weather hides the terrain, or if communication breaks down, the valley becomes a box with invisible walls. And Kathmandu is not the only airport where patterns appeared. Thousands of miles west, in the Canary Islands, another airport became linked with repeated disaster. Los Rodeos Airport on Tenerife, now Tenerife North. Tenerife is volcanic, steep, and exposed to fast-changing Atlantic weather. Los Rodeos sits at elevation where low cloud and fog can form over the airfield. In a clear day, the airport is ordinary enough. In fog, it can become a place where distance, direction, uncertainty disappear. On March 27, 1977, two Boeing 747s collided on the runway at Los Rodeos. One was operated by KLM, the other was operated by Pan Am. Both had been diverted there after a security incident closed their intended destination on Gran Canaria. Los Rodeos became crowded. Aircraft were parked in unusual positions. The taxiway system was obstructed. Planes had to move along the runway itself. Then fog moved across the airport. In that fog, radio communication, timing, and assumption became deadly. One aircraft began its takeoff roll, while the other was still on the runway. The collision killed 583 people. It remains the deadliest accidental disaster in aviation history. But the airport's story did not end there. 3 years later, on April 25, 1980, Dan Air Flight 1008 was approaching Tenerife North. The Boeing 727 entered a holding pattern in a region of high terrain. The aircraft struck Mount La Esperanza in cloud. All 146 people on board died. Again, the accidents were not copies. One aircraft went beyond the runway after landing, the other hit the water before reaching it. But the pattern was still unsettling. The airport sat in an environment where limited visibility, problems surrounding high ground, complex procedures, and heavy traffic pressure. Safety depended on clarity, clear altitude, clear position, clear language, clear decisions. When clarity disappears, the airport becomes dangerous in more than one way. The next location lies far out in the Atlantic on the Portuguese island of Madeira. Madeira rises steeply from the ocean. Its coastline is dramatic, with cliffs, narrow roads, deep valleys, and mountains that catch wind and cloud. The airport near Funchal was built on a narrow strip between high ground and the sea. For years, its runway was short and exposed, with difficult weather and limited stopping distance. In 1977, that airport saw 2 fatal crashes within a month of each other. On November 19th, TAP Flight 425, a Boeing 727, attempted to land at Funchal in poor weather. The runway was wet, visibility was limited. The aircraft touched down too far along the runway and could not stop in the remaining distance. It overran the end, went down beyond the runway area, and broke apart near the shoreline. Of the 164 people on board, 131 died. Less than a month later, on December 18th, SATA Flight 730, a Sud Aviation Caravel, was approaching the same airport. This time, the aircraft did not overrun the runway. It came down short into the sea, several kilometers from the threshold. 36 people died, while survivors were rescued from the water. Again, the accidents were not copies. One aircraft went beyond the runway after landing. The other hit the water before reaching it. But the pattern was still unsettling. The airport sat in an environment where limited visibility, runway length, weather, sea, and terrain left little room for misjudgment.
Madeira was not a place where an approach could be sloppy and still end safely. The runway demanded precision, the surrounding geography demanded respect, the weather demanded discipline. After the disasters, the airport changed. The runway was extended, including a major engineering project that carried part of the airport above the coastline. Modern Madeira is known for dramatic landings, but it is not the same airport it was in 1977.
That matters. Repeated accidents are not just stories of failure. Sometimes they become the pressure that forces design, training, equipment, and rules to improve. But not every difficult airport can be made easy. In Central America, Toncontín Airport in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, became known among pilots for its demanding approach. The airport sits near the capital city, surrounded by mountains and dense urban development. Aircraft arriving there have historically had to manage terrain, turns, descent, wind, and a runway with limited margins. On October 21, 1989, Ton-Sasa Flight 414, a Boeing 727, was approaching Toncontin. The aircraft descended below the required profile during the arrival and struck Cerro de Hula, a mountain south of the airport. The crash killed 131 people. Nearly 2 decades later, another disaster happened at the same airport, but in a different form. On May 30, 2008, PIA Flight 390, an Airbus A320, landed at Toncontin during rain. The aircraft overran the runway, crossed beyond the airport boundary, and ended up on a road. 5 people died, including people on the ground. One crash occurred before the runway, in the mountains. The other occurred after touchdown, beyond the runway. But the connection is the airport's narrow safety margin. At Toncontin, the danger could appear before landing or after landing. The approach demanded accuracy. The runway demanded stopping performance. The city and terrain left little empty space for a mistake to fade away harmlessly. This is why some airports acquire reputations. Not because every flight is unsafe. Most flights arrive and depart normally. Crews train for them. Procedures exist for them. Controllers work them every day. But reputation often grows around a simple fact. At certain airports, the penalty for being wrong is higher. A runway in a wide desert gives a crew time and space. A runway in a mountain bowl, on an island shelf, or inside a city valley may not. The repeated crashes near these places reveal something deeper about aviation. Accidents rarely come from one cause alone. They come from chains. A weather report, a missed altitude, a difficult radio exchange, a runway that is shorter than the crew wants, a captain who feels pressure to land, a controller managing limited tools, a chart that must be followed exactly, a cloud layer hiding a ridge, a wet runway waiting at the end of a fast approach. Each link may seem survivable by itself. Together, they can become fatal. That is why the phrase, strangely similar circumstances, matters. Similar does not mean identical. It means the same pressure points keep appearing. At Kathmandu, it was approach into a valley surrounded by Himalayan terrain. At Tenerife, fog, communication, and high ground created different disasters around the same airport. At Madeira, the old runway's position between mountain and sea left little room before or after the landing. At Tegucigalpa, terrain and runway margins turned both descent and stopping distance into life-or-death calculations. None of these places are fictional death traps. They are real airports, serving real cities and islands, where aviation has also delivered connection, tourism, trade, and daily life. That is what makes the story more serious. The danger is not that airplanes should never fly there. The danger is that the environment must never be treated as ordinary. Modern aviation has learned from crashes like these. Terrain warning systems improved, approach procedures evolved,
Crew communication became more disciplined, runways were extended, radar and navigation tools were upgraded in many places. Training placed more emphasis on unstable approaches, go-arounds, and the authority to stop trying when conditions are no longer right. But the terrain remains. The mountain is still there behind the cloud. The ocean is still beyond the runway. Fog still moves across high islands. Rain still changes braking distance. Human beings still feel pressure when a runway is close and passengers are waiting to arrive. The safest decision in aviation is sometimes the least dramatic one. Go around, climb, hold, divert, try again later. To passengers, that can feel like delay. To pilots, it can be the decision that breaks the chain. The airports in this film did not create disasters by themselves, but they exposed how quickly a flight can run out of margin when geography, weather, procedure, and human decision-making line up in the wrong order. Every runway has a story written into the land around it. At some airports, that story is flat fields and open sky. At others, it's mountains, fog, water, and a narrow path through danger. And when the same kind of crash happens more than once, the lesson is not hidden in mystery, it is written in the approach.